Hi, Curious! More than 60 years ago, one of the most mysterious tragedies in history occurred in Russia. 9 students had lost their lives in a place called Dyatlov Pass, and their deaths have not been explained for years and inspired numerous conspiracy theories. Some claim that the secret Soviet military experiments were carried out in that area, and others assume that aliens contributed to the tragedy, and others think that it was a Yeti's own doing. However, no confirmation was found for this, and imagine that it only was in 2019 that the mysterious deaths could have been explained. And it's all thanks to the Frozen Disney animated film. How is that possible? Well, you'll find out in a moment in our episode, and we will tell you exactly what happened at the Dyatlov Pass in 1959, and we'll tell you why the Soviet government kept this a secret for a long time. So who discovered that hints for solving it should be found in a fairy tale? Stay with us until the very end to hear an unbelievable story from years ago with a very current final. But before we move on, don't forget to click on the subscription button, turn on the notifications, and give this episode a thumbs up. It all started on January 25th of 1959, and on that day a group of Russian students set off on the slopes in the Urals to practice their skiing and mountaineering skills. And they were all experienced hikers, and the group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic University. After a dozen or so hours of hiking, one of the participants was forced to return because he had a knee injury, and the remaining 9 set off on a further journey through the icy wilderness. Unfortunately, in the following days, they were not heard of, and when for the next 2 weeks they did not give any sign of life or return to the university, rescue groups and even the army and police were sent out to search. Exactly on February 26th, on the slope of the hill called the Dead Mountain, a half-collapsed snow-covered tent was found in which the group's closed personal diaries and a video film made during the expedition were discovered. On their basis, it was only possible to establish that the students reached this place on February 1st and set up camp when blizzards started raging around. The rescue expedition was unsuccessfully looking for clues where to look for the missing wanderers. Eventually, traces were miraculously spotted in the deep snow that led to the first cadavers lying in the nearby mountain pass. And moreover, later they found out that the most puzzling thing was that the deceased only wore underwear and even no shoes on their feet. It also seemed that they were trying to get back to the tent and were most likely hypothermic. Unfortunately, on that day, it was not possible to find all the students, and only after 2 months of the melting snow revealed the missing 4 bodies. Their condition caused even greater concern, because as upon close examination, it was discovered that they had broken ribs and skulls, and their heads without eyes and mouths without tongues. Experts concluded that the force needed to cause such damage would have been something of a car accident, but this was contradicted by the lack of serious external wounds that might have shattered the bones. And the mystery was further deepened when it was found that the clothes of the deceased showed radioactivity, and it was impossible to explain how the enigmatic injuries occurred. And the investigation carried out at the time was quickly concluded, as it was concluded that the deaths were caused by an unknown natural force. However, no details were given, and the documents from the investigation were archived, and the Soviet administration kept the matter secret. It was not the first time that the authorities withdrew information about the tragedy. Just 2 years before the events at the Dyatlov Pass near the Urals, one of the greatest nuclear disasters in history took place, which was successfully hidden from the world for almost 30 years. The incident, which students lost their lives, was also buried in the archives at several decades later, and it was not until 1997 that the case was widely discussed in the Russian media when its leader Lev Ivanov decided to share it with the newspaper and details of the events at the pass after his retirement. When, during the interview, he also admitted that in his opinion it was UFOs and aliens from other planets who were responsible for the tragic fate of the group, and the public went mad. Witnesses began to come forward who claimed that in 1959, when the students were killed, unexplained phenomena could be observed in the skies. And that was the talk of orange orbs, which might suggest alien activity or secret military experiments with weapons. The imaginations of people were so awakened that more theories about the mysterious death of the students emerged, like mushrooms after rain. And there's been a lot of talk about Yetis, attacks by natives, and that there might have been a serious quarrel and fight in the group, as well as a failed nuclear weapon test that could explain why the bodies were radioactive. The Russian authorities, however, remained unmoved on this matter, and still no government representative has officially commented on it. Imagine that it wasn't until 2019 that the investigation was resumed, and due to the continued media interest and a multitude of bizarre hypotheses put forward by researchers from around the world. And after re-examining the evidence, it was found that an avalanche was responsible for the deaths of the 9 people, although no scientific details were provided, and this led to further doubts. And many researchers found that the avalanche theory was quite ridiculous because the slope on which the tent was placed had too little of a slope to allow it to pass. And in addition, the injuries sustained by the victims were not typical for this type of cataclysm because they usually die from suffocation rather than fractures in skulls and bones. And it was then that the famous Disney fairy tale Frozen came to the rescue, namely the Swiss scientist Johann Gaume, who went to the cinema with his children and while watching the scene in which the characters were running away from an avalanche, experienced an epiphany. He guessed that the theory of snow rolling with enormous force, which took the lives of the students, does not have to be wrong, but just prove it. And he had to ask the Disney label itself for the code for the animators used when creating the mentioned fragment of the fairy tale. He actually managed to get this information, and based on it, he created an avalanche simulation model from 1959 and analyzed its effect on the human body. Thanks to this, he discovered that there was an extremely rare so-called plate avalanche, in which a plate of snow from the surface breaks away from deeper layers and slides downwards, and its destructive power can cause injuries found in the deceased students. The analysis of the materials from 1959 only confirmed this because on their basis it was possible to establish that the snow in the Dyatlov Pass consisted of granular crystallized ice, and this structure allowed for the avalanche to descend even in a low slope, and simultaneously it was established that the snowfalls that followed it covered all the traces confirming of such a cataclysm taking place. So this guy Gaume, thanks to the simulation, developed a theory on an unlucky night. Snowflakes, and due to the strong wind blowing in those areas, collapsed on the tent, causing bone fractures in some of the people. And those who were not seriously injured tried to save the wounded comrades by pulling them far away from the avalanche as possible. Unfortunately, not all of them managed to get out of the snow, and rescuers eventually died as well, because after the whole action, they tried to survive the night under the open sky, which was impossible considering that they ran out of the tent wearing nothing but their underwear. The results of Mr. Johann Gaume's research were published in a journal, Nature, and finally provided a scientifically valid answer regarding the events at the Dyatlov Pass. And let's not forget that it was possible thanks to the famous Disney animation. And on this accent curious, we end today's episode, so be sure to let us know if you like Frozen. And did you know that one of the greatest mysteries in history was solved thanks to it? And as always, we're waiting for your comments below, so don't forget to click on the subscription button and leave a thumbs up. So see you guys later.